The morning sun cast long shadows across the small, cluttered garage when the roar of an expensive engine shattered the peaceful silence. Sofia Martinez looked up from the motorcycle carburetor she was cleaning, her dark eyes squinting against the sudden glare of chrome and polished metal. A sleek black Porsche pulled up outside Garage Martinez, looking as out of place as a diamond in a toolbox. The engine died, and out stepped a man who seemed to carry the weight of his own importance on his shoulders, Ricardo Montero. Even Sofia, who rarely paid attention to celebrity gossip, recognized the face that graced business magazines, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her family's monthly income. He moved with the calculated confidence of someone who had never been told, no. This is supposed to be a garage. Ricardo's voice carried across the small space, dripping with disdain as his expensive shoes clicked against the concrete floor. His piercing blue eyes surveyed the humble workshop with barely concealed disgust. Sofia's father, Miguel, emerged from beneath an old pickup truck, wiping his grease-stained hands on a worn rag. At 62, years of honest work had bent his shoulders, but his eyes still held the pride of a master craftsman. "Good morning, sir. How can we help you?" Miguel's voice was respectful, though Sofia caught the slight tension in his jaw. Ricardo's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Help me? I doubt it, but I'm desperate." The word seemed to leave a bitter taste in his mouth. Every specialized garage in the city has failed. Someone mentioned this place as a last resort. Behind Ricardo, Sofia could see it. A vintage Ducati 750 IS, 1973, gleaming red and silver, even from a distance. She could sense something was wrong with it, the way it sat on the trailer, slightly tilted. There was a story there, a problem waiting to be solved. What seems to be the trouble? Miguel approached the motorcycle with the reverence it deserved. "What isn't the trouble?" Ricardo's voice cracked slightly, revealing a vulnerability beneath his arrogant facade. "This motorcycle. It was my father's, the last thing he gave me before—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "The point is, it's irreplaceable, and it's dying." Sofia found herself stepping closer, drawn by both the beautiful machine and the pain she heard in the stranger's voice. But Ricardo's eyes swept past her as if she were invisible, focusing entirely on her father. "I've had it to Giuseppe's Classic Motors, European vintage specialists, even flew in an expert from Italy. 6 months, 12 different mechanics. $47,000 spent. Each number fell like a hammer blow. They all say the same thing, impossible to fix without completely rebuilding the engine, but that would destroy everything original about it." The morning light caught the moisture in Ricardo's eyes before he blinked it away, his mask of control slipping back into place. "So here I am," he continued, his voice hardening again, "in a neighborhood garage, talking to—" His eyes finally landed on Sofia, taking in her oil-stained coveralls and pulled-back hair. Some mechanics who probably learned their trade on YouTube. The insult hit its mark. Sofia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain silent, let him underestimate her. It wouldn't be the first time. Miguel's face darkened, but his voice remained steady. "Sir, perhaps you should take your motorcycle somewhere more suitable to your standards." "I would if anywhere suitable existed." Ricardo's composure finally cracked, frustration bleeding through. "Don't you understand? This is my last hope. If you can't fix it—" He trailed off. Staring at the Ducati as if it held his entire world together, Sofia watched this powerful man crumble slightly, and despite his rudeness, she felt a pang of sympathy. She had seen that look before, in her own mirror, when people dismissed her abilities because of her gender or her humble background. What exactly is wrong with it? The question escaped her lips before she could stop herself. Both men turned to look at her, Ricardo's eyebrows raising in apparent surprise that she could speak. "Excuse me." His tone was patronizing, the kind reserved for children or pets. Sofia straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "The motorcycle? What symptoms is it showing?" Ricardo's laugh was sharp and cutting. "Symptoms? It's not a patient, sweetheart. It's a precision machine that requires expertise far beyond—" He gestured dismissively at her coveralls. "Beyond what exactly?" Sofia's voice was dangerously quiet. "Beyond whatever amateur-hour operation you're running here." The words came out crueler than he intended, but his pride wouldn't let him take them back. The garage fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic. Miguel's jaw worked, and Sofia felt 22 years of being underestimated crystallize into something sharp and determined in her chest. "Load it off the trailer," she said simply. "I'm sorry." Ricardo blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "Are your impossible motorcycle, bring it inside?" Sofia moved toward the trailer, her movements confident and purposeful. "Let's see just how impossible it really is." Ricardo stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Whether it was curiosity, desperation, or simply shock at being challenged, Sofia couldn't tell. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but his hands were already moving to help unload the bike. As they wheeled the vintage Ducati into the garage, Sofia caught her father's eye. Miguel nodded once, a gesture of trust that meant more to her than any diploma from the finest technical school. The game was on. The Ducati sat in the center of the garage like a sleeping beast, its red and silver paintwork gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Sofia circled it slowly, her trained eyes cataloging every detail. Ricardo watched her with barely concealed impatience, checking his expensive watch every few seconds. "Well," his voice cut through the silence like a blade, "are you going to stare at it all day? Or actually do something?" Sofia ignored him, continuing her methodical examination. She had learned long ago that the first few minutes with any machine were crucial. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes with a vintage Ducati could be catastrophic. "The engine turns over," Ricardo continued, his tone growing more agitated. "But it misfires constantly. The timing seems off, but 3 different specialists adjusted it. The carburetor has been rebuilt twice. The electrical system has been completely rewired. And yet it still doesn't run properly," Sofia murmured, more to herself than to him. "Obviously, if it ran properly, I wouldn't be here in this He gestured around the humble garage with disdain. "In this what?" Sofia's voice was dangerously quiet as she straightened up from examining the exhaust pipes. Ricardo's jaw tightened. "Look, no offense, but I've had master mechanics with 40 years of experience work on this bike. What makes you think that I can succeed where they failed?" Sofia finished for him, meeting his gaze directly. "Maybe because I'm not limited by 40 years of assumptions about how things should work." She could see the flash of anger in his blue eyes. But also something else. Curiosity, respect. It was gone too quickly to identify. Miguel had been watching the exchange quietly from his workbench, but now he stepped forward. "Sofia, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm, resolute. "Someone needs to show Mr. Montero that talent isn't measured by the size of your garage or the price of your tools." Ricardo scoffed. "Talent? You haven't even touched the bike yet." "Because," Sofia said, pulling on her work gloves with deliberate precision, "I actually listen before I act. Your previous mechanics focused on the obvious problems, timing, carburation, electrical, but sometimes the real issue is something no one thinks to look for." She knelt beside the Ducati, her hands hovering over the engine case. There was an almost reverent quality to her movements, as if she were greeting an old friend. "This is a 1973 750 SS, she said softly, her voice taking on a different quality. "Desmodromic valve system, twin-cam engine, one of only 401 ever made." Her fingers traced the engine case lightly. "Your father had excellent taste." For the first time since entering the garage, Ricardo's expression softened slightly. "You know about these bikes." "I know about all bikes." Sofia's hands moved to the fuel tank, checking the mounting points. "But the 750 SS, it's special. Ducati's first true superbike. When it worked, it was magic. When it didn't." She looked up at him. "Well, you know." She began her examination in earnest now, her movements efficient and confident. Ricardo found himself drawn in despite his skepticism, watching as her small hands moved over the machine with surprising expertise. "The compression feels good," she muttered, working the kickstarter slowly. "Valve clearances seem right. Carburetor settings look correct." She paused, frowning slightly. "But there's something—" "What?" Ricardo leaned closer, his earlier dismissiveness giving way to genuine interest. Sofia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the rear of the bike, examining the suspension mounting points. Then she was at the front, checking the steering head bearings. Her frown deepened. "This is going to sound crazy," she said finally, "but I don't think the problem is with the engine at all." "That's impossible," Ricardo said flatly. "The engine is what's not working. The engine's symptoms." "Yes, but sometimes the cause is somewhere completely different." Sofia stood up, wiping her hands on her coveralls. "Tell me about the last time it ran properly." Ricardo's jaw worked, and for a moment, Sofia thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more vulnerable. 2 years ago, my father and I went for a ride through the mountains. It was—" He paused, swallowing hard. "It was the last good day we had before he got sick. The bike ran perfectly, like poetry in motion. And since then, it's been in storage until 6 months ago when I decided to restore it in his memory. Ricardo's hands clenched into fists. Every mechanic since has made it worse, not better. Sofia nodded thoughtfully. Storage can be hard on vintage bikes, especially if they're not prepared properly. She moved back to the Ducati, her expression intent. I need to pull the fairings off. Check the frame alignment. Frame alignment. Ricardo looked confused. But the symptoms are all engine-related. Trust me, Sofia said simply. Already reaching for her tools, Ricardo opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He watched as Sofia began removing the beautiful red fairings with careful precision, each piece laid out with the reverence due a work of art. You're very careful, he observed, his tone no longer dismissive. This bike is 70 years old and worth more than most people's houses, Sofia replied, not looking up from her work. Careful is the minimum requirement. As she worked, Ricardo found himself studying her face. There was something mesmerizing about her focus, the way she seemed to commune with the machine through her hands. None of the previous mechanics had shown this level of connection, this intuitive understanding. There, Sofia breathed, and Ricardo heard something in her voice. Excitement mixed with concern. She was staring at something near the frame's steering head, her expression troubled. What is it? Ricardo moved closer, close enough to catch the faint scent of motor oil and something floral. Her shampoo, maybe. Sofia pointed to a nearly invisible stress crack in the frame, right where the steering head met the main structure. Here's your problem. This crack is affecting the engine mount alignment by maybe 2 millimeters, not enough to see, but enough to throw off the timing chain tension and create a cascade of problems that present as engine issues. Ricardo stared at the hairline crack, feeling his world shift slightly. I mean 12 different mechanics spent 6 months fixing the wrong problem. Sofia's voice was gentle, but her eyes held a fierce satisfaction. The engine was never broken. The frame is. The garage fell silent except for the tick of cooling metal and the distant sound of traffic. Ricardo stared at the young woman who had just accomplished what thousands of dollars and months of work hadn't managed. Can you fix it? His voice was barely above a whisper. Sofia met his gaze, and for the first time since he'd entered the garage, she smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. Watch me. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem possible. Sofia arrived at the garage before dawn, as was her habit, but today felt different. Today she had something to prove. The Ducati sat exactly where she'd left it, partially disassembled but somehow still maintaining its dignity. She had spent the entire previous evening researching frame repair techniques for vintage motorcycles, diving deep into forums, technical manuals, and even calling her Uncle Eduardo, who specialized in classic car restoration 3 states away. Mija, you're playing with fire, Eduardo had warned her over the crackling phone connection. Frame repairs on something that valuable. One mistake and you've destroyed a piece of history. I know, Tio, she had replied, but I also know I can do this. Now, in the quiet of the early morning garage, Sofia wasn't so sure. The stress crack seemed to mock her confidence, so small and yet so consequential. She had all the theory, all the technique, but this wasn't a practice piece from technical school. This was a man's last connection to his father, worth more money than she could properly comprehend. The bell above the garage door chimed, and Miguel shuffled in with 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression. Are you here early? Even for you, he observed, handing her the steaming mug. Couldn't sleep. Sofia accepted the coffee gratefully, warming her hands around the ceramic. Papa, what if I'm wrong? What if the crack isn't the real problem? What if... Sofia, Miguel's voice was firm but gentle. In 35 years of working on machines, I have never seen anyone read an engine the way you do. If you say the frame is the problem, then the frame is the problem. His faith in her was both comforting and terrifying. Sofia took a long sip of coffee, feeling the caffeine begin to clear her head. The welding will have to be perfect, she said, more to herself than to her father. The heat treatment, the alignment, everything. 1 degree off, and the bike will never run right. Then it will be perfect, Miguel said simply, because you don't accept anything less. The garage door chimed again, and both Martinezes looked up in surprise. It was barely 7 in the morning, far too early for customers. Ricardo Montero stepped through the door, looking oddly uncertain. Gone was yesterday's expensive suit, replaced by dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that somehow made him look younger, more human. I "I brought breakfast," he said awkwardly, holding up a bag from the upscale cafe downtown. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten, and I thought—" He trailed off, seeming to realize how presumptuous the gesture might appear. Sofia blinked in surprise. "You brought breakfast?" A flush crept up Ricardo's neck. "I couldn't sleep last night thinking about what you found. That crack. How did 12 different mechanics miss it?" "Because they weren't looking for it," Sofia said, accepting a surprisingly good-looking breakfast sandwich from the bag. "When you assume you know what the problem is, you stop seeing what's actually there." Ricardo nodded slowly, then seemed to notice the welding equipment Sofia had set up near the workbench. "You're going to weld the frame here? Where else?" Sofia took a bite of the sandwich, definitely better than her usual breakfast of leftover pizza or gas station coffee. "But don't you need special equipment, climate-controlled environment? I mean, this is extremely precise work." Miguel chuckled from his position at the workbench. "Mr. Montero, my daughter welded her first frame repair when she was 16. That Honda over there," he pointed to a restored vintage motorcycle in the corner, "completely split frame. She rebuilt it from scratch." Ricardo's eyes widened as he took in the beautiful restoration. The Honda gleamed like new, its lines clean and purposeful. "You did that?" Sofia shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "It was just practice, nothing as valuable as your Ducati." "Just practice," Ricardo repeated, shaking his head. "Jesus, I've been such an ass." The admission hung in the air between them. Sofia looked up from her breakfast, studying his face. The arrogance from yesterday was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect. "Yes," she said simply. "You have been." Ricardo winced. "I deserved that. Look, I'm not good at being wrong, or at asking for help, and yesterday when I walked in here," he gestured around the humble garage, "I made assumptions about you, about your father, about what a real garage should look like." "Assumptions," Sofia said carefully. "Like thinking a woman can't understand engines, among other things." "Yes." Ricardo's jaw tightened, but not with anger, with shame. "My father would have been ashamed of how I acted. He always said that respect should be earned both ways, and that skill has nothing to do with appearances." Sofia studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or empty charm, but his eyes were direct, honest, and she found herself believing him. "Apology accepted," she said finally. "But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for her." She nodded toward the Ducati. "She deserves to run the way she was meant to." Something shifted in Ricardo's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "You talk about it like it's alive." "All good machines have souls," Sofia said seriously. "The great ones, anyway. Your Ducati has been in pain for 2 years, and nobody listened to what she was trying to tell them." Ricardo stared at her for a long moment, then moved closer to the partially disassembled motorcycle. "What is she telling you?" Sofia set down her coffee and moved to the Ducati's side, her hands hovering over the exposed frame. "She's saying that she remembers running free in the mountains with you and your father. She wants to sing again, but she can't while her bones are broken." The poetry of her words seemed to surprise Ricardo. "And you can heal her bones." "I can try." Sofia picked up her welding mask, checking the settings on her equipment one final time. "But I need you to understand something, this repair. It's going to take time, maybe days, and there's always a chance that you could make it worse," Ricardo finished. "I know, but Sofia," the use of her name startled them both. "Yesterday, I saw something in your eyes when you looked at this bike. The same thing I see when I look at my father's photo, love. And I'd rather trust someone who loves her than someone who just sees dollar signs." Sofia felt something warm and unexpected bloom in her chest. When was the last time someone had understood her connection to machines? When had anyone looked past her gender, her background, her age, to see the passion underneath? "Okay then," she said, pulling on her welding mask. "Let's bring her back to life." As Sofia began the delicate work of preparing the frame for repair, Ricardo found himself a place to sit where he could watch without interfering. Miguel moved about the garage, handling other customers and giving them space, but Sofia could feel both men's attention on her work. The pressure should have been overwhelming. Instead, for the first time since Ricardo had walked into their garage, Sofia felt exactly where she belonged. The acetylene torch hissed to life with a small blue flame that quickly blossomed into a precise, controlled fire. Sofia adjusted her welding mask and took a deep breath, centering herself the way her father had taught her years ago. "Welding is like meditation," Miguel had told her when she was barely tall enough to reach the workbench properly. "You have to be completely present, completely focused. The metal will tell you what it needs. But only if you listen. Now, with Ricardo's expensive motorcycle depending on her skill, those words echoed in Sofia's mind. She had spent the better part of 2 hours preparing the crack, cleaning away decades of accumulated stress and microfractures, creating the perfect conditions for the repair. Ricardo sat on an overturned crate about 6 feet away, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid interfering. He had been uncharacteristically quiet for the past hour, watching Sofia work with an intensity that might have made her self-conscious if she weren't so completely absorbed in the task at hand. "The flame temperature has to be exactly right," Sofia murmured, more to herself than to him. "Too hot and I'll warp the frame. Too cool and the weld won't penetrate properly. How do you know when it's perfect?" Ricardo's voice was soft, genuinely curious. Sofia paused, considering the question. "The same way you know when music is in tune, I guess. It just feels right." She resumed her work, guiding the torch along the hairline crack with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. The metal began to glow, taking on that particular salmon pink color that indicated the perfect welding temperature. Miguel appeared beside Ricardo, both men watching as Sofia began laying down the repair weld. Her hands moved with absolute confidence, adding just the right amount of filler rod at exactly the right moments. "She has a gift," Miguel said quietly, pride evident in his voice. "I taught her the basics, but this is something you can't learn from books." Ricardo nodded, unable to take his eyes off Sofia's work. There was something almost hypnotic about watching her hands move, about the way she seemed to commune with the metal itself. None of the highly credentialed mechanics who had worked on his Ducati had shown this level of connection, this intuitive understanding. "Where did she learn to work on vintage bikes?" he asked. "Everywhere," Miguel replied. "Every bike that comes through that door, she studies it. Manuals, forums, YouTube videos, phone calls to experts around the world. But mostly, she just understands them." Sofia's torch went out as she finished the primary weld. She lifted her mask, her face flushed from the heat but her eyes bright with concentration. "First pass is done," she announced, examining her work critically. The weld was clean, nearly invisible, blending seamlessly with the existing frame material. "But now comes the tricky part." "Tricky part." Ricardo stood up, moving closer to see. "Heat treatment," Sofia explained, setting down her torch and reaching for a different tool. "The weld area needs to be stress-relieved, or it'll just crack again under load. But vintage frames like this, they don't always respond to heat treatment the same way modern alloys do." She had prepared for this moment, researching the exact metallurgy of 1973 Ducati frames, calling 3 different specialty shops to confirm her approach. But research could only take her so far. The rest was skill, instinct, and more than a little faith. "What if it doesn't work?" Ricardo asked, and Sofia heard genuine concern in his voice, not for his investment, but for her efforts. "Then I start over," she said simply. "But it's going to work." Sofia fired up a different torch, this one designed for precise heat control rather than welding. She began the delicate process of heat treating the repair area, watching the metal's color change as it went through its thermal cycle. Ricardo found himself holding his breath as he watched her work. There was something mesmerizing about her absolute focus, the way she seemed to know exactly what the metal needed without any visible reference points or measurements. "You're not just fixing a motorcycle," he said suddenly, the realization surprising him as much as Sofia. "What do you mean?" You're creating art, the way you work. It's like watching a sculptor or a painter." Sofia paused in her heat treatment, looking up at him with surprise. "It's just metalwork." "No," Ricardo said firmly. "So it's not. I've watched a lot of people work on machines over the years. Assembly line workers, professional mechanics, engineers. None of them work like you do." A flush crept up Sofia's neck that had nothing to do with the torch flame. "You're just seeing someone who cares about doing it right." "Maybe that's exactly what I'm seeing," Ricardo replied softly. Their eyes met across the glowing metal, and for a moment the garage seemed to fade away. Sofia felt something shift inside her chest, something warm and unfamiliar and slightly terrifying. Miguel cleared his throat pointedly, breaking the moment. "Sofia, the heat treatment." "Right." Sofia quickly returned her attention to the frame, cursing herself for getting distracted. This was exactly the kind of moment when mistakes happened, when a microsecond of inattention could ruin hours of careful work. She completed the heat treatment cycle, then set the frame aside to cool naturally. "That's it for today," she announced, pulling off her work gloves. The repair needs to cool slowly, and I need to fabricate a couple of fixtures to ensure perfect alignment when I reassemble everything. How long? Ricardo asked. 2 more days, maybe 3. I want to take the time to do it right rather than rush and create new problems. Ricardo nodded, then surprised her by asking, Is there anything I can do to help? Sofia blinked. Help? I mean, I know I'm not a mechanic, but surely there's something. Cleaning, organizing, fetching coffee? His expression was earnest, almost boyish. I can't just sit at home wondering if my father's bike is going to survive surgery. Miguel chuckled. Mr. Montero, this garage has never had a volunteer who owns more cars than my daughter has fingers. Maybe it's time for a change, Ricardo replied, looking directly at Sofia. If you'll have me... Sofia studied his face, looking for signs of condescension or pity, but all she saw was genuine interest, and perhaps the beginning of respect. Okay, she said finally, but you follow my rules, work at my pace, and don't touch anything without permission. Deal, Ricardo said immediately. Extending his hand when Sofia took it, she was surprised by the calluses on his palms. For all his wealth and polished appearance, these were working hands, hands that understood effort and creation. Tomorrow at 7, she said, not releasing his handshake immediately. I'll be here at 6:30, Ricardo replied, his smile transforming his entire face. As he left the garage that evening, Sofia found herself looking forward to tomorrow in a way that had nothing to do with motorcycles and everything to do with the man who was learning to see her as more than just another mechanic. Day 3 brought an autumn rain that drummed steadily against the garage's metal roof. Sofia arrived to find Ricardo already waiting in his car. True to his word about arriving early, she felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach as she watched him hurry through the rain, a paper coffee cup in each hand. Good morning, he said, shaking raindrops from his dark hair. I brought coffee from that place you mentioned liking. Sofia accepted the cup gratefully, noting that he'd remembered she preferred it black with just a touch of sugar. Such a small detail, but somehow it felt significant. Ready to get our hands dirty? She asked, pulling on her coveralls. More than ready, Ricardo replied, and she was surprised to see he'd come prepared in old jeans and a work shirt that had definitely seen better days. The Ducati's frame had cooled perfectly overnight, and Sofia's initial inspection of the weld filled her with quiet pride. The repair was invisible, seamlessly integrated with the original metal. Now we rebuild, she announced, moving to the workbench where she'd laid out all the components in precise order. Every bolt, every gasket, every connection has to be perfect. What followed was a dance of sorts. Sofia would explain each step, demonstrate the technique, then guide Ricardo's hands as he learned to feel the difference between properly tightened and over-tightened bolts, between a gasket that sealed correctly and one that was slightly askew. You're a natural at this, Sofia observed as Ricardo carefully aligned the engine mounts. His movements were becoming more confident, more intuitive. I used to help my father work on cars when I was young, Ricardo admitted, not looking up from his task. Before we had money, before the business took off, some of my best memories are of Saturday mornings in our garage, just him and me and whatever broken-down car he was trying to coax back to life. What changed? Sofia asked gently. Ricardo's hands stilled for a moment. Success, I guess, once the business started making real money. He stopped working on cars himself, hired people for that, and I got caught up in the business world in being important. His voice carried a note of regret. I forgot how good it felt to create something with your own hands. Sofia nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. My father always says that machines don't care about your bank account. They only respond to genuine skill and respect. Your father is a wise man. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rain providing a soothing backdrop to the careful assembly process. Sofia found herself stealing glances at Ricardo as he worked, noting the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the gentle way he handled each component. Sofia, Ricardo said suddenly, can I ask you something? Sure. Yesterday when you were welding, I've never seen anyone work like that. Where did you learn to do that level of precision work? Sofia paused, considering how much to share. Trial and error, mostly, and necessity. Necessity. She gestured around the humble garage. We can't afford to make mistakes here. Every job has to be perfect the first time, because we can't afford the liability of a comeback. So I learned to get it right. Ricardo was quiet for a moment, then said, That's not the whole story, though, is it? Sofia looked up, surprised by his perceptiveness. What do you mean? I mean, necessity might have taught you to be careful, but it didn't teach you to work with that level of, I don't know how to describe it, artistry. Connection. You don't just fix machines. Sofia, you communicate with them. The observation was so unexpectedly insightful that Sofia felt her breath catch slightly. You really see that? How could I not? I've been watching you work for 3 days now, and it's like... He struggled for the right words. It's like watching someone speak a language I never knew existed. Sofia felt heat rise in her cheeks. No one had ever understood her relationship with machines so clearly, so quickly. I've always been able to sense what's wrong, she said quietly. Even as a kid, I could hear when something wasn't quite right with an engine, feel when a repair wasn't going to hold. My father says it's a gift. It is a gift, Ricardo said with certainty. An incredible one. They resumed their work, but something had shifted between them. The air felt charged with possibility, with the kind of understanding that rarely develops between strangers. It was Ricardo who made the discovery that changed everything. Sofia, he said, his voice strange. Look at this. He was holding a small metal plate that had been hidden behind the engine mount, revealed only when they'd removed the motor for frame access. Engraved in elegant script were the words, Para mi amor, siempre, DM. For my love, always, Sofia translated softly. Ricardo's face had gone pale. DM. Those are my father's initials. Diego Montero. Sofia examined the plate more closely. It was clearly original to the bike, the engraving aged to match the rest of the metal. Your father had this made. I don't understand. Ricardo's voice was barely above a whisper. He never mentioned anything like this. And my mother's name was Carmen. Not, who could Diem be referring to? Sofia watched emotions play across Ricardo's face. Confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been pain. Maybe there's more to your father's story than you knew. Ricardo stared at the engraved plate, turning it over in his hands. All those months of repairs and nobody found this. It was hidden so perfectly. Maybe it was meant to be found by the right person, Sofia said gently. Someone who cared enough to really understand the bike. Their eyes met, and Sofia saw vulnerability in Ricardo's expression that made her chest tighten with an emotion she was afraid to name. What do I do with this? He asked. What do you want to do with it? Ricardo was quiet for a long moment, still staring at the mysterious engraving. I want to put it back, he said finally. Whatever story this represents, it's part of the bike's history, part of my father's history. It deserves to stay where it belongs. Sofia smiled, and she saw Ricardo's expression brighten in response. I think that's exactly right, as they carefully replaced the plate in its hidden position. Sofia couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was significant in ways beyond the obvious. The bike was revealing its secrets to them, sharing mysteries that had been hidden for decades. And Ricardo, he was revealing depths she never would have suspected beneath his polished exterior. Tomorrow they would finish the restoration, but tonight Sofia found herself wondering what other surprises awaited them both. The morning of the 4th day arrived with unusual clarity, as if the previous day's rain had washed the world clean. Sofia arrived at the garage to find Ricardo already there, but instead of his usual early bird enthusiasm, he seemed nervous, pacing near the workbench, where the fully reassembled Ducati waited. Having second thoughts? Sofia asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. Ricardo stopped pacing and turned to face her, his blue eyes reflecting a mixture of anticipation and fear. What if it doesn't work? What if we've put all this effort in, and she still won't run properly? Sofia set down her coffee and moved closer to him, understanding flooding through her. This wasn't just about a motorcycle anymore. It was about his connection to his father, about proving that some things could be saved, that some broken pieces could be made whole again. Then we try again, she said simply. But Ricardo-san, look at her. They both turned to gaze at the restored Ducati. The vintage motorcycle gleamed under the garage lights, every component cleaned, adjusted, and perfectly aligned. The red and silver paintwork seemed to glow with inner life, and the chrome exhaust pipes reflected their faces like mirrors. She's beautiful, Ricardo breathed. She's ready, Sofia corrected. I can feel it, can you? Ricardo approached the bike slowly, his hand hovering over the fuel tank. When he finally made contact, his expression shifted. Yes, he whispered. There's something different. Something, right? Sofia smiled, feeling the familiar surge of confidence that came with completed work she knew to be perfect. Let's wake her up. Miguel emerged from the office. Drawn by the gravity of the moment, Word had somehow spread through the neighborhood that this was testing day, and Sofia noticed Mrs. Chen from the flower shop next door peeking through her window, along with several other curious neighbors. "No pressure," Ricardo said with a nervous laugh, noticing the small audience gathering outside. "The bike doesn't care about the audience," Sofia said, checking the fuel levels one final time. "She only cares about whether we did our job right." Sofia made a final inspection of everything. Oil levels, fuel connections, electrical systems, timing settings. Every component had been cleaned, calibrated, and carefully assembled. There was nothing left to check, nothing left to adjust. "The moment of truth," she announced, stepping back from the motorcycle. Ricardo moved to the Kickstarter, his hand trembling slightly as he prepared for the first attempt. Sofia could see the weight of 2 years of disappointment in his posture, the fear that this attempt would end like all the others. "Wait," Sofia said suddenly. Ricardo froze. "What, did we miss something?" "No," Sofia said, moving to stand beside him. "But this isn't just your moment. We did this together. We should start her together." Something shifted in Ricardo's expression, surprise giving way to gratitude, then to something deeper. "Together," Sofia nodded, placing her hand over his on the Kickstarter. "On three." "On three," Ricardo agreed, his voice husky with emotion. 1. The garage fell silent, except for the distant sounds of morning traffic. 2. Sofia could feel Ricardo's pulse through his hand, quick and strong with anticipation. 3. They kicked down together. The engine turned over once, twice, and then caught with a sound that was pure music. The Ducati's distinctive twin-cylinder rumble filled the garage, smooth and strong and absolutely perfect. For a moment, nobody moved. The motorcycle sat there purring like a contented cat, its exhaust note exactly as it should be, deep, rhythmic, powerful, without being harsh. "Oh my God," Ricardo whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine. "She's really running, she's actually running." Sofia felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to the perfect engine note. This was why she loved what she did. This moment when something broken became whole again, when silence became song. Ricardo suddenly grabbed her in a fierce hug, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "You did it, Sofia, you actually did it." "We did it," Sofia corrected, laughing despite the tears threatening to spill over. When Ricardo set her down, his hands lingered on her shoulders, his face closer to hers than it had ever been. 6 months, he said softly. 12 different mechanics, $47,000, and you figured it out in 4 days. "Not just figured it out," Sofia said, acutely aware of his proximity, of the way he was looking at her. "We brought her back to life." The Ducati continued to purr between them. As if adding her voice to the conversation, Miguel approached with a huge grin, extending his hand to Ricardo in congratulation. "Mr. Montero, I think it's time for a test ride," Miguel suggested. Ricardo looked from the motorcycle to Sofia, something unreadable in his expression. Would you come with me?" Sofia blinked in surprise. "Come with you? I mean, you know this bike better than anyone now. You should be the first to hear how she sounds on the road." Ricardo paused, then added more quietly, "And I'd like to share this moment with you." Sofia's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I don't have a helmet. I brought an extra," Ricardo said quickly, producing a second helmet from behind the workbench. I was hoping this moment would come." Sofia looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. Then she looked at the waiting motorcycle, then back at Ricardo's hopeful face. "Okay," she said. "Let's see how she runs." As Ricardo wheeled the Ducati out of the garage and into the morning sunlight, Sofia couldn't shake the feeling that this ride was going to change everything. The impossible motorcycle was running again. But more than that, she was about to discover what it felt like to fly. The Ducati's engine note echoed off the garage walls like a hymn as Ricardo guided the motorcycle into the street. Sofia settled onto the passenger seat behind him, hyper-aware of how close they were, of how her hands naturally found their place on his waist. "Ready?" Ricardo called over the engine noise. "Ready?" Sofia replied, and she felt him relax slightly against her touch. Ricardo eased the clutch out, and the Ducati moved forward with the smooth, confident power that had made these machines legendary. Sofia felt the vibration of the perfectly tuned engine through her entire body. But more than that, she felt the bike's joy at being alive again. They rode slowly at first, Ricardo clearly still amazed that the motorcycle was actually functioning, but as they reached the open road leading toward the mountains, Sofia felt his confidence grow. The Ducati responded to every input with eager precision, her exhaust note changing pitch as they climbed through the gears. "She's perfect," Riccardo shouted over the wind, and Sofia could hear the grin in his voice. "She's singing," Sofia shouted back, and she felt Riccardo's laughter rumble through his chest. They climbed into the hills overlooking the city, following the same route Riccardo had described taking with his father 2 years ago. The morning sun painted everything in gold, and the Ducati devoured the winding road with an eagerness that spoke of machinery in perfect harmony. When they finally stopped at a scenic overlook, both of them were breathless, not from exertion but from pure exhilaration. "I can't believe it," Riccardo said, pulling off his helmet and turning to face Sofia. His hair was tousled, his eyes bright with excitement and something else that made Sofia's pulse quicken. "She runs like she's brand new, better than brand new." Sofia removed her own helmet, acutely aware of how the ride had brought them even closer together. "How does it feel?" "Like..." Riccardo struggled for words, his gaze shifting between Sofia and the motorcycle. "Like getting a piece of my father back, like remembering what it feels like to be really truly happy." The sincerity in his voice made Sofia's chest tight. "He would be proud, you know, of you bringing her back to life." "No," Riccardo said quietly, his eyes meeting hers directly. "He would be proud of you, of what you accomplished, what you are." The way he said, "what you are," made Sofia feel like she was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful. "Riccardo, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice suddenly urgent. "These past 4 days working with you, watching you, I've never met anyone like you, Sofia. Your talent, yes, but more than that, your passion, your integrity, the way you see beauty in broken things and refuse to give up on them." Sofia's heart was beating so fast, she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Riccardo, I know I have no right," he continued, stepping closer. "I know I walked into your garage 4 days ago as the worst kind of entitled ass. I know we come from completely different worlds. But Sofia, I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they dared cross. Sofia stared at him, seeing not the arrogant millionaire who had dismissed her days ago, but the man who had brought her coffee, who had learned to work with his hands again, who had trusted her with his most precious possession. "You don't know me," she said quietly, though her heart was screaming the opposite. "I know enough," Riccardo replied, reaching up to touch her face gently. "I know you have magic in your hands and fire in your heart. I know you see the world differently than anyone I've ever met. I know that when you smile, really smile, it's like watching the sun come up." Sofia felt herself leaning into his touch, despite every rational thought in her head. "We're from different worlds, Riccardo. This could never work." "Why not?" "Because," Sofia gestured toward the city spread out below them. "Look at your life, then look at mine. You have boardrooms and business deals and society events. I have grease under my fingernails and live in a 2-bedroom apartment above a garage." Riccardo was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you know what I was doing 4 days ago? Sitting in a conference room arguing about quarterly projections with people I don't even like, for a company that makes more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, feeling like I was slowly suffocating in a life that had somehow become completely meaningless." He moved closer, his hands finding hers. "And then I met you, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to care about something real, to work towards something that mattered, to feel truly alive." Sofia wanted to resist, wanted to be practical, wanted to protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak of falling for someone so far outside her world. But the way he was looking at her, the sincerity in his voice, the memory of his hands working alongside hers. "Sofia," he said softly, "tell me you don't feel this too." She looked into his eyes and saw her own reflection there, saw the possibility of something she had never dared to dream about. And despite every logical reason to say no, despite every voice in her head warning her to be careful, Sofia found herself nodding. "I feel it," she whispered. Riccardo's smile was incandescent. He cupped her face in both hands, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Then that's all that matters, everything else. We'll figure it out as we go." When he kissed her, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded, Sofia felt like she was flying even higher than the mountain road had taken them. The morning sun, the perfect engine note of the idling Ducati, the incredible man holding her like she was something precious, it all combined into a moment of such perfect happiness that Sofia never wanted it to end. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Riccardo rested his forehead against hers. "We should go back," Sofia said reluctantly. "We should," Ricardo agreed, making no move to let go of her. People will wonder where we are. They will. Neither of them moved. Sofia? Yes. Thank you. For the bike, yes, but more than that. For showing me what I was missing. For reminding me who I used to be, for making me want to be better. Sofia felt tears threaten again, but this time they were happy tears. Thank you for seeing me. Really seeing me. How could I not? Ricardo said simply. You're extraordinary. The ride back to the garage passed in a blur of perfect machinery and new possibilities, but as they pulled into Garage Martinez, Sofia could see something was different. A small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, customers, even Mrs. Chen from the flower shop. And standing in the center of the group, his expensive suit and superior expression unmistakable, was a man Sofia recognized from business magazines. Harrison Wells, Ricardo's business partner and biggest rival. Trouble, Sofia murmured as they dismounted from the Ducati. Ricardo's expression hardened as he spotted Harrison. Big trouble. As they approached the garage, Harrison stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, well, Harrison said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Ricardo Montero, slumming it in the suburbs. And who might this charming young lady be? Sofia felt the crowd's eyes on them and realized that their fairy tale morning was about to collide very hard with reality. The real test was just beginning. Harrison Wells surveyed the small garage with the same expression he might use when examining something unpleasant on the bottom of his shoe. Everything about him screamed expensive, from his hand-tailored suit to his platinum watch, to the way he held himself like he owned whatever space he occupied. Ricardo, Harrison said, his voice carrying that particular tone rich people used when they were slumming. When you didn't show up for the board meeting this morning, I had to wonder where you could possibly be. Imagine my surprise when my assistant tracked your phone to this place. Sofia felt the crowd's attention shift between Harrison and Ricardo. Sensing drama, Mrs. Chen looked like she was watching her favorite soap opera, while Miguel moved protectively closer to his daughter. I've been busy, Ricardo said simply, his arm moving almost imperceptibly closer to Sofia. Harrison's gaze landed on the Ducati, and his expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. My God, you actually got it running. How much did this miracle cost you? Nothing that concerns you, Ricardo replied, but Sofia could hear the tension creeping into his voice. Oh, but it does concern me, Harrison said with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, especially when you're spending company time playing mechanic instead of attending to business. His eyes moved to Sofia, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. And I have to say, I'm curious about your assistant here. Sofia isn't my assistant, Ricardo said, his voice warning Harrison to tread carefully. She's the mechanic who accomplished what 12 specialists couldn't. Harrison's laugh was sharp and dismissive. A mechanic? How? Quaint. He turned to address Sofia directly. Tell me, my dear, what's your background? Trade school, community college, YouTube university? Sofia felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, Ricardo stepped forward. Her background, he said coldly, is being the most talented mechanic I've ever encountered. Her education is none of your business, and I'd suggest you show some respect. Respect? Harrison's eyebrows rose dramatically. Ricardo, surely you can't be serious. A little garage romance is one thing, but... Careful? Ricardo's voice was dangerously quiet. Harrison seemed to realize he was treading on thin ice, but his arrogance wouldn't let him back down completely. Look, I understand the appeal, pretty girl. Grateful for the attention of a successful man, probably very appreciative. But let's not pretend this is anything more than a temporary diversion. The crack of Sofia's palm against Harrison's cheek echoed through the garage like a gunshot. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison stared at Sofia in shock, one hand raised to his reddening cheek, clearly having never been struck by someone he considered beneath his station. You little... Harrison started, taking a step toward Sofia. He never completed the sentence. Ricardo moved between them so fast that several people in the crowd gasped, and when he spoke, his voice carried a promise of violence that made Harrison step back instinctively. Finish that sentence, Ricardo said quietly. And I will break your jaw. Ricardo, you can't be serious about this girl. This woman, Ricardo corrected, is worth 10 of you, and if you ever speak to her that way again, or about her that way again, I will destroy you professionally and personally. Howie clear? Harrison looked around the garage, clearly realizing that he had badly misjudged the situation. The crowd was staring at him with open hostility, and even Ricardo, usually the picture of corporate diplomacy, looked ready to throw punches. "You're making a mistake," Harrison said, straightening his tie and trying to salvage some dignity. "She's not your kind of people, Ricardo. This infatuation will pass. And when it does—" "When it does," Sofia interrupted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, "I'll still be the woman who accomplished something your money couldn't buy. I'll still be the person who brought something broken back to life, and you'll still be a small, petty man who measures worth by bank accounts." Harrison's face went purple with rage. "You have no idea who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Sofia said, stepping closer to Ricardo. "I'm talking to someone who's so threatened by genuine talent that he has to tear others down to feel important, someone who's so empty inside that he can't recognize love when he sees it." The word love hung in the air between them, and Sofia realized she had just declared her feelings for Ricardo in front of half the neighborhood, but instead of embarrassment, she felt a fierce surge of pride. Ricardo's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You heard her," Ricardo said to Harrison, his voice calm but final, "and now you can leave. You're not welcome here." Harrison looked around the garage one more time, clearly trying to think of some cutting remark that would restore his superiority, but the crowd's expressions were uniformly hostile, and even he wasn't foolish enough to push further. "This isn't over," he said finally, directing his words at Ricardo. "Yes," Ricardo replied simply, "it is." As Harrison stalked toward his expensive car, Mrs. Chen called out cheerfully, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." "Me, Joe?" The crowd burst into laughter and applause, the tension finally breaking. Harrison's face went even redder as he got into his car and drove away with more speed than dignity. Miguel approached Ricardo and Sofia, his weathered face creased with concern. "Mr. Montero," he said carefully, "I hope this won't cause problems for you in your business." Ricardo looked down at Sofia, then back at Miguel. "Miguel, the only problem I have is that I let someone like Harrison Wells stay in my life as long as I did." He squeezed Sofia's hand. "Everything else is exactly as it should be." As the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about the drama they'd just witnessed, Sofia found herself alone with Ricardo behind the garage. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have slapped him, shouldn't have made a scene." "Don't," Ricardo interrupted, pulling her closer. "Don't apologize for standing up for yourself, for standing up for us." "Us." Sofia's heart fluttered at the word. "Us," Ricardo confirmed, his hands framing her face. "Sofia, what you said in there about love—" "I meant it," Sofia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's crazy. I know it's too fast. I know we barely know each other, but I love you too," Ricardo said simply, and the words hit Sofia like a physical force. "You do." "I do. I love your passion, your talent, your courage. I love the way you see beauty in broken things. I love that you just made Harrison Wells, one of the most powerful men in the city, slink away like a scolded child." Ricardo's smile was brilliant. "I love that you're not intimidated by anything or anyone." Sofia felt tears threaten again, but this time they were definitely happy tears. "What happens now?" "Now," Ricardo said, leaning down to kiss her forehead, "we figure it out together, one day at a time. Your business partner just became your enemy because of me. Harrison was never really my partner, and he was always my enemy. He just wasn't honest about it." Ricardo's expression grew serious. "Sofia, I need you to understand something. My life is going to change because of this, because of you, and I couldn't be happier about it." "How can you be so sure?" "Because," Ricardo said, pulling her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat, "for the first time in years, I'm not just existing, I'm living. And I'm living because you showed me what it means to care about something real." Sofia looked up into his eyes and saw her future there, uncertain, maybe complicated, definitely challenging, but also full of love and possibility and the kind of happiness she had never dared to dream about. "I love you too," she said again, just because she could. "Good," Ricardo replied, his smile lighting up his entire face, "because I have some ideas about putting that talent of yours to work on a much bigger scale." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Ricardo said, "that Harrison Wells just gave me the perfect excuse to start my own company, and I'm going to need the best mechanic in the city as my business partner." Sofia's eyes widened. "Business partner. Equal partnership," Ricardo clarified. "Your expertise, my capital, our shared vision of building something real and honest and beautiful." The impossible motorcycle sat nearby, purring contentedly, as if approving of their plans. Sofia looked from the restored Ducati to the man who had gone from arrogant stranger to beloved partner in just 4 days, and she realized that sometimes the most impossible things were actually the most inevitable. Yes, she said simply. Yes to the business partnership. Yes to everything, Sofia clarified, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. Yes to the partnership, yes to the adventure, yes to whatever comes next, even if it gets complicated. Especially if it gets complicated, Sofia said with a grin. I like fixing impossible things, remember? As Ricardo spun her around in another joyful embrace, Sofia caught sight of her father watching from the garage doorway, his face radiant with pride and happiness. Behind him, the neighborhood had returned to its normal rhythm, but somehow everything felt different now, full of possibility, full of love. The impossible motorcycle had brought them together, but Sofia realized that what they had built in these 4 days was something even more precious than a perfectly restored vintage bike. They had built trust, understanding, and a love that could overcome any obstacle. Sometimes, Sofia thought as Ricardo kissed her again under the morning sun, the most impossible repairs were the ones that mattered most, and sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, those repairs didn't just fix what was broken, they created something entirely new, something beautiful, something lasting, something that would run perfectly for many, many years to come.